Thank you for joining us today on the Tridion Docs 15.1 Bootcamp that is related to public SOAP and REST API. Ivo van der Lagemaat, Product Owner Architect, and me, Andriy Zhidko, Product Owner, will be presenting it over to you. So today we are going to first talk about where we are in terms of API. We are going to talk about SOAP web service. We will introduce a new Open API that is going to be public in context of Tridion Docs 15.1, and we'll be covering reasoning for Open API benefits, positioning towards other APIs, and in context of release, client, API coverage, and authentication, and with a coding session at the end. So first, let's take a look in terms of where we are in terms of API, and when you're creating a new version of a public API, you always need to take into account API compatibility. But what actually that API compatibility means, let's learn from Tridion Docs API evolution. Difference between the first API 1.0 and 2.0 was not that big. It was an enhancing branching feature in the product and filter keywords. API 2.5 was a deliberate decision on migrating to more modern .NET framework from the legacy COM+ technology, where goal was functional compatibility of the new API 2.5, although technically you need to change your code to use new classes and methods as well as new security protocol. For Tridion Docs, it was also a challenge since we are the first consumers and early adopters of our public API, and all applications like client tools, translation organizer, and others required adjustments in this case. Once new version is in progress for development, the goal is to make it better for end user, but not different from functional perspective. So in essence, API compatibility has two aspects: functional, that is coverage of the feature in the product, and technical, that is about communication protocols, security protocols, and other stuff. And preferably, you keep both compatible with no breaking changes. But sometimes, as you can see, code changes and recompile of your custom applications are unavoidable. Across product releases, we do support multiple API versions with different statuses. In context of each API endpoint, there is a compatibility table for API methods. So some of the old API calls we are holding under deprecated column as long as costs allow us to do so. For some of the API calls, we provide a good new alternative based on our experience, feedback that we receive, or security concerns that result in dropping the old one. Some that don't have a good alternative are still supported. Moving on. So let's take a look on API 3.0 in context of layers. There is a new assembly layer with models that support public OpenAPI 3.0. That layer has v0 version and obsoletes XAPI layer. v0 version is not for a public usage, and there is no guarantee on cross-product version compatibility for it. The reason why we are not using v0, the reason why we are actually using v0 and not exposing all the APIs, all the methods in v3, because less is more. For example, API 2.5 has 211 public functions that need parity, and imagine if we will add all the v0 methods to v3 endpoint. It make it further new version of API, very big effort in terms of implementation. A new public open API surface, that is a new API 3.0. So this one, it obsoletes deprecated ISMX SOAP with authentication context and WCF SOAP with Trust API surface. It also deprecates WCF SOAP with OpenID Connect in favor of OpenAPI with OpenID Connect, and functional compatibility is there. And rewiring, although rewiring is required to start using this, but we do share your concern. And as I said, we are the first early adopters of our public API. So Tridion Docs Open API is a RESTful API. There are data model changes in context of migration from SOAP to REST. API 2.5 is using XML models like each object, each fields, while API 3.0 is using JSON models that allows client generation from JSON. API 3.0 handles multi-value and time zones gracefully. All this in details will be covered later in the presentation. And as I said, OpenAPI deprecates WCF, OpenID Connect in favor of OpenAPI with OpenID Connect, and functional compatibility is there. As part of Tridion Docs CD layout, we do have different code samples that are covering multiple business cases relevant to our customers. So there is a code sample for Java application using our WCF endpoint with legacy WS Trust Authentication scheme. There is a code sample for case when you want to use from your custom React-based web application a WCF endpoint protected with modern OpenID Connect authentication scheme, so with access management. Example of desktop application to be used together with WCF endpoint protected with modern OpenID Connect authentication scheme. Another code sample for cases when you have a React-based web application that is connected with our new OpenAPI endpoint and using backend for frontend layer for authorization and authentication. Also code samples for organized space extensibility, one for frontend, including backend extension part, and another for only backend part of the extension. And finally, example to extend collective spaces that is using SAPI endpoint. And this is a reference table with all code samples that I have just talked about. And with this, I would like to hand over to Ivo.
Thank you, Andriy. So let's talk a bit more about the SOAP web service that we currently are having. So as you probably know, we have the SOAP web service for a very long time already, and is mainly exposed through the WS Trust, the WS Federation authentication. But during our way of modernizing the authentication in Tridion Docs with the 15th release, we also did it basically on the SOAP 1 as well, and it was mainly used by our client tools. So the SOAP calls are the same basically between those two different authentication schemes, but only the authentication is different. And now for 15.1, we also open it as well for the public. So the public can also use our SOAP web services with the OpenID Connect. And like I said, it's already used by the client tools in the 15, and yeah, we didn't receive any feedback that's not working or issues with it. So we are quite confident that it also works for you as well. So that's why we make it available for the public. If you want to talk to the endpoint, you also have to change a little bit in the URL as well. So, like before, then yeah, it's about the HWS endpoint. There's something like a WCF, and that one is mainly used indeed for the SOAP endpoint. That's still there. It's only used for WS Trust and WS Federation. So there's another folder, also seen as in IIS settings as well. There's a different application that's called the OWCF, and that one you should use if you want to use modern authentication. And yeah, like I said, the functionality between the SOAP and between the SOAP, different authentication schemes, so WS Trust and WS Federation, and modern authentication is the same. So functionality-wise, everything remains the same. It's only the authentication that is different. And a little bit story about how we actually did it. So normally you part WS Trust, WS Federation is part of your whole SAML token, but now we actually add an extra claim to it, and that's basically the access token coming from access management, and that is something we sent across the wire. And on the backend, we actually extracted different claim and validated with the access management that it's a valid one, and also says who you are. And based on that one, you're authenticated, and we actually process your request and give you the response you are expecting. Like Andriy said, we have a couple of examples on the CD. And that's something like the desktop application for modern authentication. That's on the CD that explains it and shows a little bit how it's done for a desktop application. The whole authentication, also talking to access management, and then you have something like launching your browser, and then you do the whole authentication business, or using like a service client as well. There's also an example that's basically a React web application that talks to a particular its own backend, and with that backend, you actually make the call to our SOAP API, but then using modern authentication. And there as well, you actually can see how it is all encapsulated, that token into the claim. Like we said, so it's a part of this D layout, and if you go to the resources code, you can actually find that a couple of zip files, and the desktop application and the React applications are there to unzip and have a look at the code. About modern authentications, there are also a couple of community blog posts as well on our community. So if you're interested, you can also read those as well. It also explains a little bit more how we handle how we do currently our modern authentication. Now going back to Andriy to talk about the Open API.
Thank you, Ivo. So indeed, let's talk about our new Open API that is going to be public as part of Tridion Docs 15.1 release. So let's first start with explaining why we choose Open API standard. So nowadays, customers are building more and more different applications using public APIs, especially custom web applications, and maintaining various client libraries is too expensive for us. And Open API standard has great interoperability for non.NET languages and easy to use with web application code. So using Open API specification, client libraries can be auto-generated for a chosen language, and that is why we decided to build a RESTful API following Open API standard. As I said, we want to make it easy to work with our new API and support the programming languages you are familiar with. And developing libraries manually is quite a time-consuming operation, and maintenance effort increases with each language that we need to support, and keeping all that in synchronization is even more work. Open API standard gives a possibility to choose your programming language and generate a client library from a spec.json file. So let's do a summary why we did choose Open API standard. The Open API specification allows the describing of REST APIs in the standard programming language agnostic way, makes it possible for both humans and computers to discover and understand the capabilities of the service using a Swagger UI or a spec.json file, We are describing our API using OpenAPI specification that allows generating of a client libraries in various programming languages, making it easy to communicate with our API, and implementers can focus on their application. Moving on, we do recommend to use the client library instead of using endpoints directly, although you can do that, use them directly. There are multiple benefits of using client library. So with the client library, you will have objects for models that you are sending and receiving that makes it easier to work with in the code. With direct calls, it's harder to construct request message because you need to maintain the request model. Path of the method doesn't always explain the method very well as you also need to choose a verb that you're going to use. Is it a get, post, or put, or delete? It's easier to use client library in cases of error handling situations. So at the end, you are focusing on the business logic of your application using client library and not on the maintenance of this separate API calls. Just for a reference, in case using direct API calls, so currently we have about 125 endpoints, which at the end will result in about 25,000 lines of code, of TypeScript code for such an approach with maintaining direct API calls. As I mentioned previously, we are the first early adopters of our public APIs, and new Tridion Docs Open API is not an exception and is used by our new organized space that is successor of a web client. Organized space was one of the main drivers for new RESTful API using Open API standard and continue driving this initiative with the new features. We did cover a lot of technical need for a new Open API. Let's also look on the business reasoning behind that. So nowadays, having REST API is kind of a standard capability that customers or prospects are expecting or asking. This initiative was announced already a while ago as part of modernization initiative and required a final push to make it happen. And the new features that we are introducing in context of Tridion Docs 15.1 have coverage only in OpenAPI, like, for example, Publication Hub. And with this, I would like to hand over to Ivo.
Yeah, thank you, Andriy. So yeah, let's talk about what are the main differences compared OpenAPI to the SOAP. If you use it before the SOAP, everything was just one big string that was actually returned, and that makes it very sometimes hard to interpret what kind of value is it at the front end, basically, if you're using or consuming basically the SOAP web service. So you also must be very good basically in XML readers to actually parse the string, or use something like XPath to actually get the right value out of it. But if you're returning a value, you still don't know actually what it is. Is it like a string? Is it a number? Is it a date time? Is it multiple value? Yes or no? It's like, currently it is using like a comma separated string for detecting multiple values, and you have to implement that logic in your client. Also, binaries are basics for encoded in the SOAP, and those limitations basically all gone in the OpenAPI, using more like strongly typed models. So if your client is capable of generating those ones, it is make it way easier to use in your application as well. To get the right values out of it as well. And also if it's like a datetime that is returned, you can also use it as a datetime. That makes it way easier to use. So we talked about the SOAP OpenAPI. So what kind of endpoints do we have basically on our web server? So we have the ASMX that's used in the authentication context. It's deprecated. It's mainly used used by a couple of Java implementations. For them, it's easier to talk to HMX endpoint than to a WSF endpoint. Really, in combination with WS Trust, it can be problematic with the support of libraries, although it is a standard. So we have SOAP with WCF, and we have now two kind of authentications. That is the WS Trust and OpenID Connect, and the WS Trust that is one is deprecated, still used by isRemote, but also isRemote is also now capable of using OpenID Connect, and also the client tools currently also using OpenID Connect. For the OpenAPI, we have one kind of authentications that is OpenID Connect that is used by organized space, and that's like supported. I also still want to mention an endpoint that is not really advertised, but we have seen it. The customers are using it. It's like our MVC ASP.NET endpoint. Sometimes people are building custom web applications. Maybe they clone or copy our ECM that is based on MVC, and also currently does the whole authentication bit on OpenID Connect. They're still using it, but along the way, like if you look at organized space, there's still a couple of like old technology betas that are there, something like event monitor or translation jobs. But also after the 51, they also get transferred to a React application. Hence, that MVC backend is not needed anymore. So if you have any kind of custom application that is still counting or depending on this kind of endpoint that we have, like ECM. With MVC in ASP.NET with open authentication, please try to convert to another technology, but there's a high chance that it's going to be removed. This part in a release after 15.1. The endpoint for the Open API, it's also under the ish WCS. It's called API, and they can actually find it. There's also documentation available as well if you use it with the URL ending on API docs. It requires authentication, so normally you're not authenticated when using this OpenAI documentation. But if you use an organized space and actually use special another kind of URI that's actually routed also to our Open API, and then you authenticate it because organized space require authentication. Using the Open API. So if you look at that API documentation, you can actually see that there are two versions. There's one that's called V3 that's considered the public one, and customers can use it and it remains backwards compatible with the Tridion docs versions. There's also internal one, we call it internal, but under the hood is also called V0 as well. That is basically V3 plus some extra functionality for organized space. That extra functionality, you have to think about the properties windows or the list views that are really customizable, and hence they also need to be visible as well in organized space, and that's are required special endpoints in that case. So they're not the public ones. So that extra functionality in V0 that is not guaranteed to be backwards compatible between the Tridion docs versions. So it's up to us basically if it requires a change. And then we can actually do it without any, not breaking our API, but you should not counter it and not use it. So it's mainly V3 for our customers to use that endpoint for writing their custom applications. We tried to have an overview of all the methods that there are. So we actually come up with kind of classes, what we have basically in our SOAP API, and the end goal of the Open API is to have feature parity. But building those feature parity, it just takes a while to actually produce all kind of endpoints, because they're quite a number on SOAP. There are about 211, and our main driver was organized space as the client for the Open API. Because you have to start at certain points, but you also have to validate if you're on the right path, and then it's always good to have an application that's using it. So that's why we actually developed our Open API together with organized space. So with when we released 51, we also produced quite a number of Open API calls. That's about 83, and we keep on testing it to have feature parity in a 51. We are now at 126, So there's still a gap between what the SOAP offers and currently our API offers. There's still a gap for about, I think about 71 calls. So over time, you will actually see that the number of calls on our REST or our Open API will improve. In the end, we'll have a feature parity together with SOAP. So our positioning. So although it's not complete, we will feel confident that you actually can start using it. So we accept tickets and also feedback on our Open API. Like I said, so we don't have feature parity to compare to SOAP, but we would strongly still advise if you have to write a new application, start using the Open API. And if you have some kind of missing functionality, just try to use our SOAP API as well then. But yeah, I think a good starting point is still using the Open API, and what's actually missing, try to use our SOAP. That also will smoothen your migrate path in the future as well. That you only have to do a couple of extras that are not available yet, but then later you can actually replace those SOAP calls with Open API calls, so to use fully utilize our Open API. Also something to be aware of. So our Open API, we don't actually send response headers related to cores, because cores, you can actually set something like which hosts are basically allowed to use this one. And if you have to create more applications, you always have to tweak those kind of settings. And of course, you can actually say like, yeah, allow all hosts. Yeah, but what is then the purpose of this? Of course. So you can better actually control it in your application as well. So if you create a web application that contains a little bit of a front end, but also a little bit of a backend as well, and a backend is mainly responsible sometimes really as a pass-through basically to our Tridion Open API, and hence you don't need those core settings because everything is coming from one resource, so everything should be fine. And also this paradigm is basically also sometimes called backend for frontend as well. So you have a backend for your frontend application that handles this kind of logic. So here you can actually also see an arrow straight from the browser to the Open API, and that is the cross, so don't go that way. For the main naming method, so when you see our Open documentation, you sometimes see posts, and posts are mainly used for create or update resources. But sometimes you see actually a get between them and you say, hey, a post is the get, that's strange. But yeah, with the get, it's mainly all the parameters that you have to pass it mainly on the query string. And the query string also has a limitation as well. And to bypass this limitation, we actually created a post call for it. You can actually get more information that is actually possible on the URL. So actually to bypass this issue, but we actually have the option also to give you some kind of hint of generating the method if you're using our Open API with a client library. So you something like the operation ID, and then we set it actually to a get. So you know you actually receiving information. And then when you generated the client, you use something like client dot and then with the get. And behind the scenes, it's basically extracted away for you. Is it like a post or a get? You don't care about it. It's mainly your application you care about. And this will hide these kind of little implementations. But yeah, when you see the Open App documentation, you will notice this kind of behavior. We also have the notion of items you're going to select. So sometimes if you want to really like a fast application, you only need IDs, and based on IDs, you can navigate through systems. But it's mainly like a machine application. It's not really for users because users like titles and descriptions. So we have the option, if you ask for properties, for example, do you only need ID, or do you also need the title and description? And a title and description is mainly indeed for users to have something easy to read. And then you also have field groups. So if you ask, for example, for a topic, you can ask for a field group set to none. Then you don't get any fields. You get to use the basic fields. So there's really basic, so user-friendly fields that are displayed in UI. You also have descriptive fields as well. Think about primary keys to uniquely identify an object. And you also have system fields as well, like modified on, for example. And then the last one is basically giving all fields for this particular item. But then, yeah, we're saying like you have a non-basic descriptive system and all. So how can I find what is what? So there's also an option with is remote. In with is remote, you can basically ask for the field definition. And in the field definition, there's a column like SDB. And the S is for system, it's used by the CMS. The D for descriptive, so identifiable fields. And the B for basic. So then you also have a feeling, if you have to call it, what kind of group information do I need to send? For uploading and downloading content, we have actually made explicit calls for those ones. So you don't need to use a base64 encoding anymore. And also before, there's also the notion of chunking. So you have to request multiple parts and then combine yourself together to have that particular content. It's now basically one call. You can up and download the content. That also makes it hopefully a little bit easier as well to use. Like I said, we also have the notion of a field value. So it's basically a field that has a value. And if you really look into it, then you noticed in the strongly typed model generated that you sometimes have a field value, but it does not have a value property. And then based on the particular types, you know the type of the field value, you have to cast it basically to the right type. And then you can actually get a strongly typed value out of it. So if you have something like a string field value, you do the object with field value dot value, you get a string out of it. If you do it for a datetime, then you field num dot value, it returns your datetime. So it's really in the object you're expecting. Because it's a datetime, you can also do it like add new or add and then add a month to it, and then you have the current date, or you have the date plus an extra month. So it also is way easier to use as well. And also we have the notion then of multiple values. So we call that indeed like multi-string string field value of a multi-datetime field value. There's basically an array of those field values. So it also gives an easy property as a count as well to see how many fields there are. And also you don't have to parse it yourself anymore, because before it was like in the SOAP one comma separated values. You don't, it's now basically an array, a collection that makes it way easier to use as well. One of the last things I want to mention is basically the allowed actions on items. But that also drives our buttons basically in organized space. Sometimes you see them appearing, sometimes disappearing as well, depending on your selection, what you selected. So if you ask for an item or for a list, you can also set a property include links, and that will actually give you the links, what is possible with this particular item. In this example, you basically put, they can update it, but also in delete. And you have to also to think it's like there's not a lot of logic behind it, because if we really want to calculate if it's possible to delete something, we also have to do a where used. Is it used somewhere that is published, for example? And that process takes way too long. So if you have like a list of 1,000 items, and you have to think about 1 second for each item to figure out really if it's possible to delete, then you have 1,000 seconds to wait for the response. So that's not really acceptable, but it gives you a good indication what is done. So if you are in a read-only folder, for example, then the delete will disappear because we know you're not allowed to delete it. So it's very shallow kind of information, what is possible, what is not. But really perform the action on the item itself really goes through the normal business logic and will block it if it's really not possible. And also you have to remember, like if you make a request, it's also a snapshot in time. So like 1 minute or 5 minutes later, it can change already. And then I want to give you a demo of how to use an open API. So I created basically a React application. It uses an ASP.NET backend for the handling for the bit of authentication and proxying. I'm gonna generate a TypeScript client from it. I'm gonna download it, and based on that one, I'm gonna create a client from it. Try to proxying request. Show you how authentication is done, and also how to register an application in access management. Just to give you an overview about, this is more about how to use our open API. So it's basically generate a client library and they can actually use it. But if you want to write a web application in a secure way, you have to think about a little bit more stuff than only generating your client library. You also have to think about how to do the authentication bit, because actually it should be our web application that's done it, the whole authentication, but also in a secure way. So the secure way currently is using cookies. And before it was mainly keeping access token in browsers, but it's not considered secure anymore. Now it's basically sent to cookies. And on the BFF part, will actually replace your cookie with an access token, and with that access token, also called something called the bearer token, it's actually sent to the OpenID, and our OpenID endpoint is basically expecting bearer tokens for the authentication bit. So you have to think about a little bit more as well, and you can also see the links. It's all related to access management as well, and to your identity profile. So let's see if I can give a small demo. So here you can actually see the smaller demo application. It's yeah, like I said, written in Rectech. I did a couple of menu items for getting a version. There's no implementation behind it. Also something I want to say about my settings. So who am I? Want to do something for listing items in the folders, showing the topics properties, and also doing something about the authentication as well. But yeah, there's currently no logic behind it. So let's start. So before I start, actually, I want to make sure that I actually installed NSWAG that I used for generating from the OpenAPI, also using TypeScript. And I actually created one kind of convenient method for me, generate client, that actually using NSWAG to produce this particular TypeScript one. So like I mentioned, you have a particular endpoint on our system. WCF with the OpenAPI documentation. It will actually show all the methods that we currently have, and here you can actually see that this version 3 or version E0, that's called internal. Here you can actually find the documentation. So here you can also do the save link. Then I will actually save it as well. And in my OpenAPI client, in this particular source code, you can actually see in this folder that it just generated or download this API in there. They can actually see OpenAPI. It's coming from my demo environment, and here you can also see that sometimes IDEs are capable of also generating some kind of UI that actually displays all kind of methods that are in your definition. So I actually downloaded now. I actually want to generate a client. So before I generate a client, I also need something like a configuration file, for example. If I now do something like a configuration file, that is something like an NSWAG new, then if you do that one, then it actually generating this kind of NSWAG file. It actually helps you generating the client. By default, I'm using .NET 6, but my application .NET 8. Here's something like the from. It's like an example, but it's not the right one. It's actually, it should be coming now from my OpenAPI.json. And it had a lot of kind of code generators. So we actually use the OpenAPI to TypeScript, but there actually is also one for C# in that one. Yeah, we don't need. We can actually remove. Then we have to make sure we have to produce valid JSON. And then, of course, we also have to give some kind of an output. And its output is, we call it like OpenAPI.ts like TypeScript. And we save it. And then we're going to use this client. And then we can actually generate a client. So I was actually saying that I actually have a convenient method, so I can npm run generate TypeScript. Oh, generate client it was. It actually generates a client for me. It will also find some information about this particular file. And then if I look at it, it actually produced a TypeScript file. So now I can actually use this kind of new OpenAPI with particular generated TypeScript. So it should now be relatively easy to implement. So currently now I have basically my, it is the right path. This is something like is WCS API version. So that is probably not the right endpoint as well, because it's actually sending the URL basically not to my web application, because that one is localhost. It actually goes to this particular endpoint, and that is mainly because if you look at this generated client, it's actually always has it hard coded over here. So that is not good. So in that sense, we have to go to the version. And then in the client, you basically have to do something like Open API. And that's the one I think I used. The example. So I have to do something like Open API. So that is actually sending it to my backend for front end, basically. This is not going to directly go to my Open API endpoint. It's going to my application, basically the backend part of my application. I have to also mention, like, I set up a little bit of a proxy because I'm using like hot reload, and that actually have a special node module that is actually running my my website in it. And with that website, I actually transfer it basically to the backend for frontend. And here I actually have a couple of methods or a couple of endpoints that are actually using the redirect in that sense. So now I actually open API. So if I now look at my application, clear this a little bit and do get. Then do the get again. Then indeed, I can now go to localhost, open API application, not found. That's right, because I don't have any, like I don't proxy request. I'm only receiving the request now on my backend. So now I have to do something like proxying requests. So I actually have to make some changes. So if now to go basically to my backend, then I actually comment some code. So here I actually say, hey, I want to I want to add a reviews proxy. Actually, I'm using Yarp for this one. Yarp is one for Microsoft. Actually, trying to now load the configuration. And of course, in the application, I have to be aware that it is actually using the reverse proxy. And the reverse proxy, you can also configure it as well, how it is used. And that is basically done in your normal app settings. And then you specify in your reverse proxy that the path, like we had, like OpenAPI, it is filled in the client, basically. It will catch all of them. It puts a pattern API, and it will basically send it to this endpoint. And this is basically the endpoint of our Open API. So I basically have to restart it. My application. So it is started now. Just refresh it and do a get version. It is still not working. So why is it still not working? Now I get unauthorized. So before it was not found. Now it's not authorized. So I can also check it as well in my on my debug basically of my backend or front end. That actually says it does proxying all the requests basically to this endpoint. And that endpoint say, hey, not authenticated. It is correct because I didn't do any authentication yet. So how do I actually add authentication? So there's basically a package in on the backend that's basically for adding authentication that abstracts a lot of details for you, so it makes it quite easy to use. basically I'm using cookie authentication, but also using OpenID as well. So the default is cookie. If I have a cookie, that's fine. If I don't have any cookie, I'm using OpenID Connect indeed for the, if it's not there for this challenge basically to require to log on, it's using OpenID Connect in the same as the sign out. But the default one is basically the cookie authentication. And with the cookie, you can also do something like a expire time. So it's only allowed now for 55 minutes. If you want to use sliding expiration, yeah, you can set it to true or false. But if you set it to sliding expiration, you have to be aware of that your access token is by default from access management 1 hour. So if you want to do some kind of refreshing or refresh logic behind the scenes, you also have to implement that yourself. Just be aware of it. And also for security reasons, it's the best to say same site strict. And then here you basically set the authority. The authority is basically our access management with a particular client ID, and yeah, like a lot of extra code as well to make it work. So they actually do it for the authentication, and then we have to say that our application also using authentication. But yeah, then of course we need to somehow make sure that the people actually registering from our web application. So we still have our application. If we use this one. First we want to actually authenticate before making the request. So this one is also not going to work. And I prepared it a little bit, this one. So I have to comment out some code. So before I actually make always a request, so on my backend or frontend, I have a special endpoint asking for the user. So who am I? Am I authenticated? Yes or no? So if the response is okay, I will actually display some kind of user information from it. I also have the option to log in as well. And then I can say something like, yeah, on my backend or frontend, I have an endpoint that actually says login and with a redirected URL as well. So I know when all the login happens, I know to which basically page I want to be redirected. And the same basic code for logout is also a logout endpoint as well. But yeah, then of course we also need to do something as well on our backend. So on our backend, I actually created a couple of endpoints. One for the login, one for the user, and for the logout. And for the login, it's just basically challenging what it performs. So basically what we did for authentication. So we added basically cookie and ORDC as well. So with the challenge async, it basically challenge the ORDC flow basically. And then of course we have to log out as well, and logout is also some logic as well. And for the user, I'm actually trying to get some kind of user claims and display them nicely in the UI. And then I actually enable those endpoints by commenting this. And then I have to basically restart all the backend changes that I did by rerunning it. So now hopefully I've implemented my authentication also from the client as well. So I can hopefully hide it a little bit. So if authentication, I can actually hopefully press the sign in button. That will actually try to trigger the whole flow with access management. And you can say, hey, unknown client or client not enabled. I think, what is that? But yeah, like access management basically work with applications. So you have to register your application in access management. So now if you go to access management, I log in. There you have your applications. Then you have to add an application. Copy paste some stuff in there. This is basically the name for the client ID. I was using Bootcamp. You can configure it whatever you would like. Also, the best way of using is authorization code with Pixie that's way better than actually implicit flows are not really secure anymore seen. But yeah, the most secure one is actually authorization code flows with Pixie. And then of course you also have to find in a redirect URL that is allowed. So this one is basically safe. This is basically saved. Nice. Okay, I can actually sign out. And then hopefully, if I go back to my demo, then I go to authenticate, sign in. Hey, there is this. There's actually access management with my identity provider, so I can actually select one. Type in my name. Bam, still not working. You do not have permission to access the bootcamp. Okay, so if we now basically go to access management again, then of course with this identity provider, make it a little bit easy for me. They can actually see, hey, this is basically my bootcamp demo applications. And this one actually requires our Tridion docs on the manager API because we're going to use this one. So this demo app requires the content manager docs API as a user. Save it, update it. Okay. Sign out. Okay, I'm actually signed out and now actually using my localhost bootcamp application again. Authentication, sign in. Hopefully this works now. Voila, fine, I'm logged in. And here you can actually see some kind of values that also are displayed for a purpose that, yeah, you can see it is actually me. This is my identity provider. Give some nice demo stuff. So now come back to the version. So am I now able, if I get version, to get the version? Then it actually still throws you an error. And let's see how it is actually, what is actually causing it. Oh, sorry. If I just refresh this one, then I go to get version. Then there's still a 4 thing that I just authenticated myself. I registered the application, but it's still not there. And basically the trick is what is not working, because you also have to send basically these the information. So what you're actually missing now is sending the particular bearer token. So after loading the configuration, you actually need a transform, and with the transform, you basically checking if there is an access token with the particular context of the current logged in user. If that is the case, you actually add a header to the request to our open API with the bearer token containing the access token of the just logged in user. So if I now just restart it again, then hopefully it will work. And of course, first, yeah. You see I'm still authenticated. I can make the request, I get version, and there it is, the version. So everything looks fine and easy, but then of course I'm gonna look a little bit more careful as well. I was just saying always cookies, and that kind of stuff. And now you see a cookie that is rather huge, like it's a demo. And if I look at it, it is large. It is way too large. That is actually that should be possible. So if I look at it in this cookie overview, you see it is actually chunked across different ones because, it's a lot of stuff. It's about I think this one is about 4K. So for every request, we have to actually send the access token to our backend for frontend. Indeed, from the browser, and that's also it's quite a lot of information to send. And we also want, you still have the access token basically in the cookie on the web application, and it's also not really considered as good as well. So there is an option to make it a little bit more secure. And that is basically using a session store. With a session store, you basically save the access token in a store, and then use a cookie, which is very small, more like a session ID, and that one is basically that one is then sent to the browser, and so it is actually very small. I have here a memory cache session store, and that is actually prepared as well a little bit. And that session store is basically in the security. Here you can actually see it, and that is this implementation. It's a very simple implementation. It's still using a memory basically for storing stuff, like a memory cache. If you really want a scaled out system with multiple backend for frontend, it does not work. You have to actually save this one in a database that is shared across the services. And that one, in that way, you make it a little bit smaller the cookie. So if now stop and rerun, and hopefully I get a very small cookie and still get a version. So still, am I authenticated? No, yeah, because I have to actually reschedule it, so I can actually sign in. Because I already signed in with access management and with my identity provider, everything more or less happens automatically now. Not really automatically for a lot of redirects, but the end result is, hey, SID detected, hey, you're already logged in, hence it's okay, go back to access management, and then you get a token. So now I can actually do the cat version, and here it is, the version. And if I now look also at the cookies, it should be smaller in that sense, or did I not really save it correctly? Because it should basically use the smaller one. Maybe I had to close my browser, maybe that, because cookies are sometimes stored as well. And then maybe, yeah, if I just close my browser, and then try it again, and hopefully it will have to authenticate, sign in. Go to a version, get a version, get the version again. And there you can see actually the cookie is way less. It's only slightly more than 300 bytes. So your browser don't have to send a lot of information. So that is basically it. So actually we can authenticate, we can communicate to our backend, but still, yeah, we haven't seen a lot of our generated client. So if we're going back to our code, then of course we have something like a my endpoint. So with my endpoint, I actually want to show something more about the current logged in user. So also prepared some code as well for this one. For this one, also want to display some kind of fields with this particular user. So I actually ask for the current user, and with the current user, I'm interested basically in the titles and descriptions, and also with the field group basic, and you can actually see all the parameters that we were talking about in the presentation as well for the selected objects. So this is basically an easy way of asking some all the nice stuff. And also for displaying the fields, I have something like a get field value, and the get field value that is basically I also prepared as well. That does some stuff, because like a field value, like I was mentioning before, you just have a field value, and depending on what kind of type it is, you basically have to cast it or check if the particular instance off, and with that one you can actually access the value, and with that value you can also do nice stuff as well. And so for multi-value, I actually do something like a comma separate list. I'm making comma separated that list out of it, so it will easily display it in the UI. And for the datetime value, I just put it to an ISO string. So that sense it will, it will display it nicely, hopefully. So it's also generated now, so everything should be okay. So if I now go to my endpoint, I have some properties there, and then you can actually see, hey, these are basically all the fields with the titles, the descriptions, but also the value as well. This is something like a multi-value field as well. They can actually see those are now comma separated. And then you can actually see here the properties as well. So if you look at the properties, then actually I would use, so this is basically my settings that are actually returned, and based on that, when you can actually see I have the ID title fields basically in description, and this is the description where it's coming from. I can also put here like only ID, and then if I just get my settings, you see that I don't have any title and descriptions. I only have the ID, and you also see that the title and descriptions are also gone over here as well. So then you can also see that it has some impact as well. So the less you have to transfer across the wire, the better performance there is. But yeah, for usability, you also really have to figure out what is the right approach for you. But here you can also see your generated client helps you as well. It helps you suggesting what kind of options should I use. You don't have to look at the OpenAI specifications anymore. But this is also a good reason why you should actually use a strongly typed model. It will help you getting the right method, but also help you filling in the method as well with all the right properties. That's actually for the my. Actually, I also want to show you the folder as well. So what I'm trying to achieve is, if going back to organized space, in organized space I have a folder, and that folder is actually bootcamps, and I actually want to display basically the contents of this folder. So with all the topics there, but also the columns one as well. So I go to my folder. I've also prepared that one a little bit and try to explain it. So basically here, if you press the button, it will actually do, it calls a method fetch folder contents, and then you can actually see also like create a new client, and with that client do the get folder objects list. And with that one, actually you have to give it some kind of root folder, basically, of the folder that I actually want to get items from. And then you also have already something like a file, a folder type object, and they can actually filter what kind of objects do you want. Do you want a folder, contents, or anything else? There's you contents in this one. You can also specify a language. That's something like if you want to do it for ENUS, for example, or resolution as well, like high or low. But they are basically overwritten by defaults that the current user is using. And here as well, like title and descriptions. Here you can actually set field group none. So it is actually more performant, and also like the F title, those ones are basically I'm interested in, and that is actually displayed on this particular screen. So if I now go to my folder, and actually get items in folder, then it actually more or less looks the same that you actually see over here. It will show the title, the version, the status, the date modified, but also the log by. You can also see that, hey, it's also logged by me, and it's displayed here as well. I also did this one as a convenient as one as well. So this is basically the JSON response from that method, and there's a lot of fields and information of all the items there. But you can see it's quite long already. And this one, it also contains the links that actually drives those buttons. But sometimes I've seen it in the past as well that people are using the system and they say, oh, I need those fields. But yeah, for the field group, I just don't know what to do. I just put in all. Then of course, if you hit basically the get items, it will work. But as you see over here, for example, you see already that it is quite a long list now. It is really, really long. And it has some negative performance as well, because you need to send this data all across the wire. So in order to create a useful API, be aware of what you are requesting. And this one is also like title, ID title and descriptions, but here you can also do iTitle. But yeah, like I said before, it is not very useful in a UI, because you really want to show stuff to the user, and then yeah, you're just missing stuff because you only get IDs. So also log by is not there anymore. But the response is shorter. But yeah, you have to find the right balance in order to show what you basically need. There is one little catch here as well. So if you ask for the fields, basically, you can also specify a level. And because this is more a string, like an array of strings, we also need an option to find a level. And this is what we did with the piping. Then you can something like the LNTs for the language or logical version. So especially modified on, you have those 3 delivered levels, so you can do something like logic. And then, oh, if I spell it correctly, of course. If I do it over here, boom, of version level, then you get it something indeed more on version level. So that's and then I think this one is locked on 12. But then if you look at the language level, it is indeed it is sometimes indeed seen as other kind of level. Maybe it was probably the bootcamp on this one was actually changed. But yeah, that is something to figure out yourself. So you have sometimes fields on different levels. We try to map it to the right level, but sometimes you can actually overrule it by bypassing this extra bond as a pipe, like a logical version or language. And then we go basically to the last one. That is the topic. So I also did something for the topic as well, like a small demo. So this also basically fetch the whole topic. It also called get document object by logical ID. You can specify a logical ID in there. You can also enhance it with a particular version, language, or resolution. And also, if these ones are not specified, we try to use always the latest version, latest language as possible. And then you can also get all the title descriptions, but also field group all. And also be able then to send a download link as well, so you can also download that kind of information. So now it's actually field group all. So if you now look at the UI for a particular topic and do a fetch, then it will take a while, and then you can see there are loads of indeed fields there as well with all kind of information. And in here you can actually see the JSON response for all the fields. Well, this one is quite large already because it contains all. But like I explained in the demo, we also have something like basic. So if you fill in basic, the list is already a little bit shorter as well with all the basic fields. And that actually, you can also build your own UI with basic fields, all fields, or you specify them by yourself. And then you can actually see also the level as well. So here you can actually see the field name, but also its level as well for logical, for example. In the download, I also specify the download here as well. So this is basically downloading the content for the particular item. So you can download it probably many times. Maybe I can open it in here. Not really able to open it. But yeah, it basically shows you that you can actually open it and you find it basically in your downloads folder, and then you can see it. So it's quite easy to do. Yeah, this is actually all I have to mention about the demo. I hope you found it interesting, also the demo, and also think more about also your whole application. So it's not only using the client library that you actually generate, but also think about your authentication. What kind of information are you requesting? Don't you set too much or not too little? Yeah, and then hopefully you like it, and gonna hopefully use our open API, and let us give us some feedback if you like it and how we can improve it further. Thank you.